Hey, this is Brent with Lykins Motorsports. It is Friday afternoon, and I'm finally going to follow up with our Q&A video that we had from last week. So what I'm going to do is just roll through from top to bottom all the questions that were posted on the comment section, and I'll just do my very best to answer. Some of these will be, I guess, universal type answers. It's hard to nail down specific answers to every situation, but we're going to give it a shot. I anticipate this to be a fairly long video, so I think there's 30 or 31 comments, and we'll just see how it goes. So the first comment is from Alan White, and Alan asks, I'm looking for a nice 390 built for economy. I built one with stock pistons, 10.5 to 1, and a cam with 469, 477 lift, 112 lobe separation, and 258, 266. I would assume those are advertised durations. Did some minor pocket work and contoured the guide. Same on the exhaust, but I smoothed that lower ridge. Also enlarged the port flange, still smaller than the gasket. Any opinions, as well as how would you approach this type of build? So 10.5 to 1 is kind of on my upper level for what I would do with pump gas and cast iron heads. I usually like to see that down around 9 3/4 or 9/8, something like that. Our gas is Junkie, so when I think economy, I think good gas mileage, cheap gas, and I would, build this engine for 87 octane. So I would pull the compression ratio down quite a bit. 469 and 477 lift is really, really small lift. These days, I really don't go under something like 550 lift. Most of my street cams are around 600, 630. That's completely different from the way things were done, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So technology changes, different things change, and I think with a different camshaft, with more lift that would take advantage of what the heads can do, would help you out there. 112 lobe separation, there again, a lot of guys make the habit of saying 110 lobe separation is good for street, 112 is for economy, or sometimes forced induction. And then you see the 108 is for drag race and 106 is for circle track. Lobe separation is just based on overlap. So it would depend on the other specs of this camshaft on what the lobe separation needed to be. It could be that you could run something as tight as a 106 or 107. And that sounds like it's going to be a radical cam and it's going to be nasty. But if the durations are low, it's not going to be radical or nasty, and you may build some torque with it. So that's how I would approach that. Head work works really well. A good camshaft works really well. Headers and a recurve distributor. First Eliminator says, I'm up for any engine comments or demonstrations. Also curious about your interest in the type of cars you like. What cars have you owned? What cars would you like to own? How about engine work? Where did the interest in engines begin? Have you had occupations outside of performance engines? Any specific mechanical or styling reasons for choosing Ford and Pontiacs or others? Perhaps a resume video or Brent's bio. If you do, be sure to wear your snazzy blue plaid pajama pants. All right, Mr. Mark, I know who you are here. Let's see. Curious about interest in the types of cars you liked. What cars have you owned? First car was an 86 Pontiac Fiero GT. Second car was a Nissan 240SX. I had a Shelby Cobra replica. I had a 2002 Mustang GT that I bought brand new. I had 2 Ford Explorers, a 1973 Corvette, a 1990 Fox Body Mustang LX hatch, 5-liter. Had a Dodge Charger, a newer model. So not really a lot of what I would say fun cars or old cars, whatever. But I tend to be drawn to the 60s and 70s vehicles. They're just out of my price range right now. Hopefully, years down the road, I'll be able to. I'd really like to have a late 60s Mustang coupe. So with an FE in it. And how did interest in engines begin? I would say that it's in my blood. My grandfather and my dad both were I guess still are gearheads, and I guess I inherited it like anybody else would. Dad always had some pretty warmed up cars as I was growing up, so I kind of grew up around it. When I was in college, I had the desire to own a Shelby Cobra one day. So I built my first engine, which was a 425 cubic inch Windsor, with anticipation of having a Shelby Cobra replica. And then I just kind of got into the Ford stuff after that. Ford and Pontiacs, if you notice, there's a common denominator there. I kind of like stuff that nobody else has. And I'm not saying that nobody has Ford stuff, but it's a lot less common and popular than the Chevrolet stuff. All right. No snazzy blue plaid pajama pants right now, Mark. Sorry. Particular, John, sorry if I mispronounced your name, John. Goggin, I guess. I think you're a customer of mine, right? You bought some parts off of me. Particular to a 390 FE, but also across other engine platforms. What's the pecking order for block fill, cross bolt mains, girdle studs, etc.? What conditions assumptions are considered when an engine builder determines a safe or good from experience power level? For example, if you dead hook a filled block with cross bolts is required at whatever X level of horsepower and torque, normal stroke versus stroker, etc., etc. What can you reasonably get by with for a 99% street car and drag radials? This is one of those questions that is just going to be probably too hard to nail down exactly. There's just a whole lot of variables, including how much the rotating assembly weighs, which block it is. A lot of your factory FE blocks, such as your 352 and 390 and 428, I would generally say that 600 horsepower is about that level where you need to start thinking about cross bolts or something like that. I don't particularly like the girdles on FEs. I really don't like girdles on anything. I think they're kind of a waste of money and just something to hold the main caps together when the engine comes apart. Filled block, I generally do with anything that has thinner cylinder walls, like a Cleveland or something like that. But I know that's a vague answer, but there's a lot of situations there. Thomas Croft says, would you share the specs of parts availability on Project Junkie Junk, or maybe even sell the parts you took out? That was an impressive build. You can probably go back and look at all the videos, and all the specs would have been on there, even down to the valve springs that I used and lifters. And I generally don't give out cam specs, but there's not much left of JJ, unfortunately. I got the block, got the crank, the springs, and some of the valve train stuff was used on the 311, so not much left from JJ. Paul S. asks, what is a good coil bind clearance for an engine operating below 7,000 RPM? Is 100 to 120 thousandths an acceptable range? Yes, it is an acceptable range. A lot of your spring manufacturers will tell you to try to get it in between 50 and 100 thousandths. I run a lot of springs at 100 thousandths coil bind clearance, but the higher the RPM, I generally try to tighten that up. down to 50 or 60 to keep that spring surge from happening. But yes, 100 to 120 is acceptable. Mr. E asks, what dial bore gauge do you recommend for occasional engine building? Thanks for your time, Brent. For occasional engine building, for 1 or 2 a year, I would use something like a Fowler dial bore gauge. They're 150, $200. So, next question is from Mariano Leonel. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He says, hi, how are you? My question is the next, how to adjust the geometry of rocker arms when it is a solid shaft. So I'm doing good, thank you very much. You adjust shaft mounted rocker arm geometry with the stand height. Okay, push rod length doesn't matter on shaft rockers. So you adjust the stands up and down. You either shim the stands up or you mill the stands and move them down. Hope that helps. Okay, next question is from Mick Studebaker. He says, can you describe carb and headers collectors you used on 311 dyno runs? The 311 used a quick fuel, a custom quick fuel. I have a carb builder that does all my carbs. He just happened to have a custom quick fuel 750 that he did for another customer, and he asked me if I would put some dyno time on it just to make sure everything was right. So it was just a custom quick fuel 750. The headers are, the dyno headers that we use are 1 3/4 pipe size, and I think it's a 3-inch collector. The way that the dyno that I use is you're kind of limited to what you can use for headers because of the way the dyno card is made. So you almost have to come out from the head and then sweep down, kind of like a sprint car. So a lot of the headers that we use are custom made or kind of doctored up sprint car headers. Cold Beer Racing asks, Quench, how important is it? At what point should you worry about detonation, and what can you get away with on a bad combination? There's a whole lot of situations there, and if you know a lot about early 70s engines, especially a lot of your FEs, the pistons were way down in the hole. That's not a good situation to be in. I can tell you what I generally aim for as far as quench distance, and what I would not aim for as far as quench distance. I try to keep quench around the 38 to 40 thousandths distance. I generally do not like going over 50. Now, do I have data for why I don't like doing that? No, it's just based off of what I've done during the years. I think on a forced induction situation, it's not that important. But on a naturally aspirated engine, I try to keep it around 40 thousandths. Robert Wingate asks, when deciding on a target compression ratio, is there an advantage to achieving it with piston design over cylinder head chamber design? And in what application is one more of an advantage versus the other? Question 2, can you talk in depth about rod ratio and how it affects power and torque? Question 3, elaborate on how piston speed affects the performance characteristics of an engine. So question 1, when deciding on a target compression ratio, is there an advantage of doing it with the piston or with the head? I would say that there's always an advantage of doing it with the head. If you have, say, if you're aiming for a high compression ratio, then if you do it with a cylinder head with a small chamber, that means that your piston does not need a dome or as big of a dome, so that makes your piston lighter, and that also helps flame travel because you're keeping that dome shape down. I would always try to aim for setting the compression ratio with a cylinder head. That's why a lot of the I mess around with a lot of FE stuff. So The trick flow heads usually come in at 68 or 69 cc chamber, and to me that's a really good spot to be in, because that makes I can use a piston with a bigger dish, and that makes the piston lighter. Question 2, can you talk in depth about rod ratio and how it affects power and torque? I put zero concern at all about rod ratio. I don't even do any calculations with it. I have never seen where it made that big of a difference. And on a lot of your tall deck engines, such as your big block Fords and your FEs and Pontiacs and Mopars, if you use a shorter rod, you end up with this huge piston. And I like long rods and short pistons and light pistons. So on cylinder heads where they're really efficient, I could see where a longer rod would help you a little bit, because you get more dwell time at the top dead center. Other than that, I really don't have any data to go one way or the other. I just use a lot of long rod stuff and a lot of short piston stuff. Question 3, elaborate on how piston speed affects the performance characteristics of an engine. Piston speed based around RPM, I don't think that it really affects performance characteristics. I think that it will affect durability and longevity by a long shot. If you have a really high piston speed, it's going to wear your rings quicker. It's going to wear your cylinders quicker. It's going to wear your pistons quicker. Let's see. Jim Goff says, could you do a video with a timeline for an engine build, beginning with the expected power and torque, then when and how you select engine size, camshaft, head type, rod length, compression, then where do you start with machining and fitment of parts, and then coatings and refitting? Jim, that would be an awfully long video. And at the same time, I try to do these videos to help guys out who are starting out, but at the same time, I don't want to show all my cards, I guess, is what you would say. I try to do a little bit of what, of all the things that you mentioned in different videos, but I think to do that all in one video would be a pretty time-consuming thing. I'm sorry, that wasn't a very good answer, and probably not what you would want to hear. Roger Powell says, I am trying to get a 428 built to somewhere around 500 to 600 horsepower. What brand aluminum head would be the best to use? Would I have to increase the cubic inches? So I would go for trick flow heads. Increasing cubic inches is beneficial when you want to make the horsepower down at a more reasonable RPM range. You could absolutely make 600 horsepower with 428 cubic inches. You can make 600 horsepower with a 390. It just takes more compression, it takes more RPM, that sort of thing. So when you start aiming for higher horsepower levels, but you still want to retain that streetability, then your displacement needs to go up. Sam K says, I'm wondering if you could explain what differences there are in lobe separation angles and what that means in a given engine. I'm trying to pick a camshaft for my 557 right now, and there's camshafts that are fairly similar with lift and duration, but vary between 108 and 118 lobe separation angles. Motors going in a Fox body with a C6, 12-to-1 compression, super carburetor heads, and a tunnel ramp. Sam, without getting into an hour-long discussion in camshaft stuff, lobe separation is a function of advertised duration and overlap. A cylinder head combined with the displacement gives you the necessity for a specific amount of overlap. For instance, old factory Ford FE stuff, the heads just don't perform that well. You need lots and lots of overlap. You see a lot of your like 428 super stock camshafts with a ton of duration and overlap almost approaching 100 degrees. With a modern cylinder head, you can pull that overlap way down. So again, this is going to be a very vague answer, and I'm sorry for that, but lobe separation is just a portion of what your overlap needs to be. And that's in conjunction with your advertised durations and your cylinder head choice and that sort of thing. Now, it's also a function of how much RPM you're going to turn, because with RPM, what has to happen? Your duration has to go way up to get you that RPM level. When the durations go up, your advertised durations go up, and then again, if you're wanting to pull that overlap to a specific spot, then it may be that you have to run that 118 lobe separation. I've ran 119 and more than that in some big block Ford stuff. So if you would like for me to help you spec a camshaft, then sorry, I got an itchy nose. Pollen is high here today. If you need help with a camshaft, shoot me an email, and I would be more than happy to give you a cam recommendation for your combination. Nathan Dean says, will you be doing any more testing with Project Junkie Junk, or is it all done? Project Junkie Junk is all done, and there are some remaining parts from JJ. Keep looking back though, or keep looking, checking videos, because I plan to do another dyno mule here fairly soon, and we will be reusing some of the parts from Junkie Junk. Alan Lane says, what would you have done differently to make the 311 a max effort build, but still 311 cubic inches? Okay, so that 311 was pretty far from max effort. Max effort means you're pretty much doing everything that you can in order to make horsepower. If I had that goal in mind, if somebody said, I want you to make the absolute most horsepower that you can possibly make with a 311, then I would start with an aftermarket block for thicker cylinder wall thickness and block rigidity. The crankshaft will be custom, and really redesigned as far as counterweight shape and weight and that sort of thing. Camshaft would be probably, a 9500, 9800, 10,000 RPM deal. Sheet metal intake, a lot of compression and that sort of thing. So we were pretty far away from a max effort build. Needless to say, the heads were not ported at all, and you pretty much spend a ton of money to do something like that. Vacuum pumps, or maybe dry sump, something like that. Elmer Fudpucker says, thanks for doing your channel. I'm old. I have always loved the Cleveland stuff, then moved on to the 385 series. Any chance you will be doing some in-depth series on either or both? It depends. I don't have any dyno mules planned for a Cleveland or the big block Ford, but if I get some engine orders down the road that involve those engine platforms, I'd be more than happy to do that on camera. Cleveland is a really nice engine. One of my favorites. Okay, the next username is, I would assume, Gator50, G8R50H. What are some resources you use for camshaft theory as you've come up? I want to better understand what goes into choosing valve events for specific combos. The best advice I can give you is try different stuff. Non-engine builders are going to have a little bit harder time with that than engine builders, but if you can get into a spot where you try different cams, maybe pick up some cam design software, and just see, or some engine simulation software where you can see what the durations do, what the lift does, lobe separation, that sort of thing. But I have used a ton of camshafts, and my camshaft designs are constantly changing just based on, you know, I'll see a new lobe or think of something to try, and I'll order a cam that way and put it in an engine on the dyno and try it out. And I have swapped cams on the dyno. I have built multiple engines with exactly the same specs so that I can see what the differences are. I would like to think that I do more camshaft testing than a lot of engine builders do. And since I am Ford specific, then I think that kind of almost gives me a better edge than a lot of other guys. I don't know. Hope to someday. Why are you building a Dyno Mule FE with tunnel port heads? Are those heads being reproduced now for aftermarket? Yes, they are. I don't know if they're currently out or not, but if you're on Jake Brown's fepower.net forum, there are some guys on there who are redoing the tunnel port head. As for why I'm doing a new Dyno Mule tunnel port heads, the tunnel port is my favorite FE. And I've got some things that I want to try, some combinations that I have not done before, and that's kind of why I'm doing a tunnel port. Jeff Jones says, I would like more information about hydraulic roller cam and lifters. Nobody talks about the limits, and it seems some are using at 8,000 RPM. What are the limits? Spring pressure, lift, RPM. This would be both for both a Ford Racing stock style lifter and a good aftermarket lifter. RPM limits, usually you see somewhere around the 7,500, 8,000 RPM to be a limit, and that requires a very specific cam lobe design as well as something like a short travel or limited travel lifter and a lot of spring pressure and light valves. The lighter, my cat's messing with the tripod. Elsa, quit. The lighter the valve train, the better. So if you look through some of my videos, I have a 390 FE with a hydraulic roller that went to 7,500 RPM. Very specific components, and I would think that I'm the only guy out there with a 7,500, 8,000 RPM hydraulic roller FE. I don't know. I think I was at the time. Maybe it's changed now. But you could certainly get up that high, and it just takes the right combination. If you think about it, you know, a lot of your modular Fords turn that kind of RPM with factory stock last adjusters, and a last adjuster in the modular Ford world is essentially just a little hydraulic lifter. It works off of oil pressure, and it keeps the follower pushed up. So if you think about it, if a modular Ford can hit 8,000 RPM, what's the difference between a modular Ford and a small block Chevy or a small block Ford or a big block Ford? It's generally how much weight you're trying to move around, and that should be a key to the way you think about hydraulic rollers. Jeff Mays, I am struggling with what to build for my 1967 Cougar. Will be street driven, but also road racing on Button Willow, Sonoma, and Laguna Seca. Want 7,000, 7,500 RPM, 6-speed, and 390 to 411 gears with big tires. My son has a 66 Fairlane with a 363. It doesn't quite have the power. I'm looking for 650. Pump gas a must. Want it to be reliable and not a boat anchor for weight distribution. Should I build aluminum block 393 or 427 Windsor? Or aluminum FE? Will be notching towers and using street or track coilover suspension, etc., etc. I don't like aluminum blocks on anything. They are power robbers. They require different machining techniques. They're just a pain in the hind end. So I would never recommend an aluminum block to anybody unless you are doing some kind of max effort, extremely high horsepower drag racing or something like that, where if you window a block, you need it to be repairable, or you can change sleeves quickly or something like that. A lot of your sprint car and dirt track stuff needs to be aluminum blocks just because of the weight savings on that type of build. But on most drag race cars and road race deals, I would rather see an iron block. You could most certainly get 650 horsepower out of I guess a 351 Windsor sized block. Something like a 427 or 445 or 460 cubic inch Windsor. That would be pretty easy to do on pump gas. So I would, there's a lot of different things you can do for weight distribution. Windsors are not heavy anyway, but you can also always lighten the front end of the car and move some weight around if you need to do that. Aluminum Windsor blocks are stupid expensive, like $6,000. So I would rather have a $2,500 block and put the other $3,500 into weight savings or making more horsepower. Last one. Ron Myers says, if you were to build a FE engine, would have to be fuel injected for a heavy resto mod, let's say a 61 Starliner with a Lintec AOD, and you wanted the engine to produce 550 horsepower, what would the base specs be? You're limited to using a 406 cross-bolted main block and an FE power, I guess, adapter with a Holley high ram intake. Tough one to answer, I know. Yes, it is a tough one. 550 horsepower. I don't really like using a 406 block. It's a solid lifter only block. I don't really like solid lifters for just street cars. You can do a solid flat tappet. That should do okay. When you start getting into the solid roller lifter stuff, the lifters just don't last very long because there's no pressure injected, oil pressure fed to the lifters, and they just beat themselves up. So I would probably do probably a stroked 406, around 460 cubic inches, Edelbrock, I'm sorry, definitely not Edelbrock heads, trick flow heads, and a solid flat tappet, and you would have your 550 horsepower, I think. All right, guys, I thought there was 31 comments, but it must have been some replies to the other ones, and maybe some of the replies that I made to some. Let me run back through here real quick, make sure I didn't leave anybody out. All right, I guess, oh, found one, found two. Found two. Richard Crawford. Hi, Brent. I have a pair of aluminum SK medium riser heads that I purchased from Dove. They are in need of new valve guides at this time. I sent an email to Dove Performance regarding the size or part number of the guides. Having difficulty finding guides. I think I answered this on the comment section, but if you know what size guides you need, it's very easy to get custom guides made. VRM says, did you ever get to test the funnel web on the 311 before it sold? No, I did not. Unfortunately, and Joe Crane is whooping my hind end because I did not get him some data, and I'm sorry about that, Joe. But maybe when the customer gets it in the car, we can get some good ET and trap speed numbers to show how well that funnel web works. I know Joe put a lot of work into that, so it would be nice for all of us to see some numbers on that. All right, guys, that is it. So I'm gonna call it quits for now. Appreciate you watching, and I appreciate all your comments. I read all of them, including the ones from our resident YouTube trolls. But I enjoy reading what you do and reading what you're watching. But a lot of you guys are very appreciative and give it a lot of positive things, and I appreciate that very much. And it's nice to read those comments. So it's going to be a good weekend here. Hope you're going to have a good weekend too, and should see you next week with some more videos. This is Brent with Lykins Motorsports, signing off.